Good morning. Today's lecture we will start the new topic, which is the abdomen and the pelvis, and we start with this anterior abdominal wall, and in the subsequent lecture we will then discuss the other topics related to the abdomen and pelvis. Now let's compare these two walls of the trunk, thorax and abdomen. Now, thoracic wall and abdominal wall, the musculature are essentially the same, being external oblique, internal oblique, and transversus layer. So the arrangement is similar, only in case of the thorax they are interrupted by the presence of the ribs. In case of abdomen, this is a continuous layer. Now let's discuss this boundaries of this abdominopelvic portion. So this portion is bounded anteriorly by the paired rectus abdominis muscle and its rectus sheath, and in the midline there is a this thick fibrous portion which is linea alba. Now anterolaterally are these anterolateral muscles which are similar to those in the thorax. So they are external oblique, internal oblique, and transverse abdominis. Now posterolaterally they are these muscles, quadratus lumborum and psoas major. Along with that, associated thoracolumbar fascia, and posteriorly these 5 lumbar vertebra and their intervertebral disc. Now inferiorly, this is the bony bowl which is formed by the bone of the this false and true pelvis, ilium, ischium and pubis. They form this bony bowl, and here it is inferiorly it is completed by this deficiency, it is filled by the muscles forming this pelvic floor as well as the muscles related to the perineal region. And superiorly it is bounded by this thoracoabdominal diaphragm. So now this portion, this abdominal wall, it is divisible into three parts. Upper part lying in relation to the lower 6 ribs, a mid part which is lying above the iliac crest and below the this costal margin. So this is the free portion, mid portion is the free portion, and the lower portion which is bounded by the pelvis. Now for clinical purposes like describing a swelling or pain or even performing the incision for the underlying viscera, this abdomen portion it is divisible into 9 regions, and they are defined by lines on this anterior abdominal wall. These are also known as abdominal planes, and these are these two paired vertical planes which on the superior aspect is related to mid clavicular line, and when extended inferiorly it corresponds to mid inguinal point, which is the midway between the anterior superior iliac spine and pubic symphysis. So these are the two vertical planes, mid clavicular line. Now this lower transverse plane, this is known as the intertubercular plane. As the name suggests, it is the line joining the iliac tubercle of the two sides. So this is the lower transverse line. Upper transverse line, it corresponds to this transpyloric plane. Now the transpyloric plane, it is the plane which is lying midway between the xiphisternum and the umbilicus, or a hand width below the xiphisternum. So this is the transpyloric plane, and this transpyloric plane, it is a very important plane from the anatomical point of view, because it corresponds to the tip of the ninth costal cartilage when extended laterally, and posteriorly it corresponds to the lower border of the L1 vertebra. So there are several changes which are occurring in the body in this plane, transverse plane, transpyloric plane. Like, this is the portion where the spinal cord terminates. Also, we may localize the fundus of the gallbladder, the pylorus of the stomach, the neck of the pancreas, the origin of the superior mesenteric artery, as well as the origin of the portal vein formed by the splenic vein and the superior mesenteric vein. Now the duodenojejunal flexor is lying here, and also the attachment of the transverse mesocolon is here. And because of this attachment of the transverse mesocolon, this whole portion is divisible. Abdominal cavity is divisible into supracholic compartment and infracholic compartment. Now there are several other planes which are also described. Often in place of the transpyloric plane, clinician use this subcostal plane, which corresponds to this costal margin. And there is another plane which is in the lower region, which is known as the interspinous plane. This is the plane joining the two anterior superior iliac spine, interspinous plane. So the plane which divide this abdominal portion into regions, they are considered as this vertical plane, midclavicular line, inferiorly is the intertubercular plane, and superiorly is the transpyloric plane. So using this vertical, midclavicular plane and intertubercular plane and transpyloric plane, this abdominal portion is divisible into 9 abdominal regions. The region related to the flank from above downward, they are hypochondrium, lumbar region, and iliac or iliac fossa or inguinal region. And near the midline, they are epigastrium, umbilical region, and hypogastrium or pubic region. So starting with the right side superiorly, this is the right hypochondrium, then it is the epigastrium near the midline, then is the left hypochondrium, then this is the right lumbar region, mid portion this is the umbilical region, and then is the left lumbar region, and in the lower portion this is the right iliac fossa, then is the hypogastrium or the pubic region, and then is the left iliac fossa or left inguinal region. So that's how this portion, this abdominal portion is divisible into these 9 abdominal regions, on where these viscera can be located, the pain can be localized, or the swelling can be palpated and localized. Now after the removal of the skin, the subcutaneous tissue or the superficial fascia is visible. Now the superior to the umbilicus, this superficial fascia, it is consistent with the superficial fascia found elsewhere in the body. Now inferior to the umbilicus only because the deeper part of the subcutaneous tissue, it is reinforced by many collagen and elastic fiber, so it is now divisible into two layers: a deeper layer having more elastic fiber known as fascia scarpa or the membranous layer, and a superficial layer containing more areolar tissue and fat, so this is known as fascia of camphor or the fatty layer. Now the superficial layer, which is the fascia of camphor, it is a thick areolar in texture and contains variable amount of fat, and it is often greatly thickened in case of obese individuals. And inferiorly, it lies superficial to the inguinal ligament, and thereafter it continues with the superficial fascia of the thigh. Now in the region of groin, this layer it continues over the penis and the scrotum, and here its texture is changed, it is thinner and it contains very little amount of adipose tissue, and especially in case of scrotal sac scrotum, this portion, the fat, it is replaced by a thin layer of smooth muscle known as the dartus muscle. And even this portion, it continues with the external covering of the spermatic cord. Now next, this deep membranous layer, which is the fascia of scarpa, it contains plenty of elastic fiber and it is loosely connected by areolar tissue through the aponeurosis of the external oblique, and in the midline it is intimately adherent to the linea alba and pubic symphysis. Now inferiorly, this membranous layer passes onto the front of the thigh and where it fuses with the fascia lata, 1 finger breadth below the inguinal ligament. So it is not continuing up to the thigh. Now in the midline, inferiorly, this membranous layer of the fascia lata, it is not attached to the pubis, but it forms a tubular sheath for the penis, and it forms the fundiform ligament of the penis, which is also known as this superficial or suspensory ligament of the penis. Now below the perineum, it enters the wall of the scrotum, and from there it passes to be attached to the either side of the margin of the pubic arch, and it is here referred as Colles fascia. Now this is the Colles fascia, and posteriorly it fuses with the perineal body and the posterior margin of the perineal membrane. Now the deep fascia is not well developed here, so it is unapparent. Now after the removal of the superficial fascia, the muscles of the anterior abdominal wall, they are evident, and the arrangement is similar to those in the thorax. So the external most layer is that of the external oblique. Now external oblique, they have this lateral portion which is fleshy, the point of origin, the portion of the origin, this portion laterally is fleshy, and medially and inferiorly it is becoming aponeurotic. The all abdominal this anterolateral group of a muscle, they are inserting into this midline portion, linea alba, and they are inserting through this aponeurotic portion which is forming the covering of this rectus abdominis muscle, and this covering is known as rectus sheath. So These muscle, they have this lateral portion where they originate, and near the midline their tendon they flatten to form the aponeurosis, and this aponeurotic portion forms the covering of the rectus abdominis, which is known as the rectus sheath. So external oblique, this has this lateral portion which is fleshy, and near the midline it becomes aponeurotic to form the anterior layer of the rectus sheath. As its portion and its aponeurosis, it fuses with the anterior layer of the internal oblique aponeurosis to form the anterior layer of the rectus sheath. And the direction of the fibers and aponeurosis are similar to those of the external oblique thoracis. They are directed downward, forward, and medially. And in the lower portion you can see there is a superficial inguinal ring, which is the deficiency in the external oblique aponeurosis. And also we can see between this anterior superior clear spine and pubic tubercle, this is the lower roll portion of this aponeurosis, which is known as the inguinal ligament. Now after the removal of this external oblique, the next layer which is visible is the internal oblique. Now the internal oblique, it has again this lateral portion which is fleshy, from where this is the portion where they originate. So this portion is fleshy, and towards their insertion to the linea alba they are becoming aponeurotic. Now before moving towards the linea alba, this aponeurotic they split into two layers, anterior and posterior. Anterior one merges with the external oblique aponeurosis to form the anterior layer of the rectus sheath, and posterior layer that merges with the aponeurosis of the transversus abdominis to form the posterior layer of the rectus sheath. And the direction of the fiber, they are perpendicular to that of the fibers of the external oblique. So they are directed upward, forward, and medially. Here the direction was downward, here the direction is upward. So they are 90° to the. Now after the removal of the internal oblique, the next muscle, which is the deepest of the anterolateral group, and these fiber they are lying transversely. So this is the transversus abdominis, and transversus abdominis again laterally they have this fleshy fibers, and towards the midline they are becoming aponeurotic. Now already we have discussed its aponeurotic portion, they merges with the posterior layer of the internal oblique aponeurosis to form the posterior layer of the rectus sheath. So they form the posterior layer of the rectus sheath, and they enclose this rectus sheath. This enclose this midline lying muscle, which is the rectus abdominis. This is the rectus abdominis of both sides, and they are separated by this avascular thick portion of decussation, which is known as the linea alba. And here we can see this is a deep inguinal ring, which is the deficiency in the transversus abdominis of fascia transversalis. Now here also we can appreciate this is the arcuate line, from where all the layers they are passing just anterior to the, they are forming the anterior layer of the rectus. They are all passing anterior to this rectus abdominis. So posteriorly this portion is now having only the fascia transversalis. So this is the arcuate line. We will discuss that later. Let's discuss these muscles one by one, starting with the external oblique. Now, external oblique, it originates from 8 digitation from lower 8 rib, 5th to 12th ribs. Now it originates at its anterior end from its outer border and inferior margin of each of these lower 8 ribs, and as they proceed downward they are originating near their tip. From the 12th rib it is originating near their tip, and these fibers, they interdigitate. The upper fiber, they interdigitate with the origin of the serratus anterior, and the lower fiber, they interdigitate with the origin of the latissimus dorsi. And one thing that to be noted here is none of the fiber, they originate from the thoracolumbar fascia that we are going to discuss with the origin of the internal oblique and transversus abdominis, but here no fiber, they originate from the thoracolumbar fascia. Now its insertion is a very wide insertion. Now this posterior fiber which are arising from this lower ribs, they pass almost vertically towards the anterior half of the outer lip of the iliac crest. So this anterior half of the outer lip of the iliac crest, these fiber are the fleshy fiber passing vertically from the lower ribs up to this anterior superior iliac spine. And the middle and the upper fiber, they combine to form this anterior aponeurosis. And this anterior aponeurosis is formed roughly at the level of this mid clavicular line. And here they form the anterior layer of the rectus sheath, and through this anterior layer of the rectus sheath they are merging with this linea alba. They are inserting into the linea alba, this point of decussation, and also they are inserting into the pubic tubercle, and between this anterior superior iliac spine and pubic tubercle they form this rolled margin which is inguinal ligament. So this muscle, it has three borders: a posterior border which is again a free border, and it forms the anterior boundary of the lumbar triangle. Then this superior or upper border which is a horizontal one from the fifth rib to the xiphius sternum, and this forms the portion of the rectus sheath, anterior layer of the rectus sheath, which envelop it above the costal margin. Here it only the anterior layer of the external oblique aponeurosis which wraps the rectus abdominis muscle, forming the rectus sheath. And the this lower border, this is a fixed one, and it is lying between this anterior superior iliac spine and pubic tubercle to form this rolled inguinal ligament. Now this posterior free border of the external oblique, it forms the anterior boundary of this lumbar triangle of Beckett, and posteriorly this is bounded by the latissimus dorsi, and inferiorly the base is formed by the iliac crest. and the apex is at the tip of the 12th rib, where these two muscles, latissimus dorsi and external oblique, interdigitate, and the floor is formed by this internal oblique muscle. And this triangle is relevant clinically because it may be a site of rare lumbar hernia. Just above and lateral to this pubic crest, there is an oblique gap in the external oblique aponeurosis, and this is known as the superficial inguinal ring. So it is not a ring, this is a oblique V-shaped gap. Now this oblique V-shaped gap, it has a base lying along this pubic crest infromedially, and its apex is towards superolaterally, and its two limb, they are known as crura. So it has this lateral crust which is reinforced by the inguinal ligament, and it is attached to the pubic tubercle, and this has a groovy portion which lodges the spermatic cord in case of male. And this medial crust, it is thinner and it is attached to the pubic symphysis, and it often interlaces with the counterpart of the opposite side. Now let's understand the ligaments associated with the external oblique, and we start with the inguinal ligament. As we already know, this is the thick enrolled lower border of the external oblique aponeurosis, which lies between the anterior superior iliac spine laterally and pubic tubercle medially. And this inguinal ligament, it is not linear. It has an anterior and inferior convexity only because of the traction and attachment of fascia lata towards its lower border, and the ligament is even not uniform. It is more rounded and thicker in the lateral half, and it is more flattened towards its medial half, and towards its attachment to the pubic tubercle, it becomes even flattened and horizontal, and it lies in the floor of the inguinal canal supporting the spermatic cord. Now towards its attachment to the pubic tubercle, this portion, some of the fiber are reflected here, and they goes in two direction. One set of fiber, they pass posteriorly and then laterally, and they form the lacunar ligament complex. So this lacunar ligament complex, it comprises of two things. One is the lacunar ligament and second is the pectineal ligament. So these fiber, which are continuous as the thick fibrous band over this pectineal line, this is known as the pectineal ligament, and those fiber filling this lacunae, the gap between the medial end of the inguinal ligament and the pectineal ligament, this gap, or here it is shown, this gap. So this is the lacunae, the gap, it is filled by this lacunar ligament, and this lacunar ligament, it has this medial free margin, and this forms this medial boundary of the femoral ring. Now other fiber, they pass superomedially, upward and medially, supporting the spermatic cord, and they pass behind this superficial inguinal ring and external oblique, and they pass towards the rectus sheath and they interdigitate in the linea alba, like those of the aponeurosis of the other muscles, and they interdigitate with the counterpart of the opposite side, and this part they form the reflected part of the inguinal ligament, reflected part of the inguinal ligament. Now near the apex of this superficial inguinal ring, we can see there are some fibers, they are running perpendicular to the aponeurotic fiber, and they are running from this lateral crus to the medial crus, attaching them or uh, closing them towards the each other, and these fiber which prevent these crura from separating, they are known as the intercrural fiber, intercrural fiber. So these forms the intercrural fibers. So these are the ligaments associated with the external oblique. Now after removal of this external oblique, next layer which is visualized is internal oblique, and it is much thinner and less bulkier than that of the external oblique, and it arises from three sources: from this posterior layer of the thoracolumbar fascia, next in continuity from this anterior two-third of the intermediate lip of the iliac crest up to the anterior superior iliac spine, and from lateral two-third of the upper groovy surface of the inguinal ligament. Now insertion this fiber from this thoracolumbar fascia and posterior segment of this iliac crest. These fiber they pass upward and laterally to be inserted into this lower 3 to 4 ribs and their adjoining cartilages. Now in continuity, the fiber from this iliac crest they diverge widely and they form this anterior aponeurosis, and these fiber they are attached upward to the costal margin 7 to 9 rib and their cartilages, and below the costal margin they are split around the rectus abdominis to form the anterior and posterior layer of the rectus sheath and to be attached to the linea alba in the midline. Now this arrangement it continues up to the this arcuate line which lies midway between the pubic symphysis and umbilicus, and here both these layers they pass anterior to the rectus abdominis to be attached to the linea alba. Now the fibers from the inguinal ligament they arch over the spermatic cord, and these fiber finally these become aponeurotic, and aponeurotic anterior aponeurotic fiber they merge with the corresponding aponeurotic fiber from the transversus abdominis, and they are attached to this pubic crest and pectineal line forming the conjoint tendon. So these fiber they form the conjoint tendon. Now these, so this muscle, this internal oblique, it has this free lower border which lies with relation to the spermatic cord. This fleshy fiber they are lying lateral to the cord, then they arch over, and this aponeurotic fiber, they are lying medial to the cord. Now some of the fibers, they remain fleshy and they continues with the covering of the spermatic cord as cremaster muscle. We will discuss that with relation to the inguinal canal. Now after the removal of internal oblique, next muscle which is the deepest among the centrolateral group is transversus abdominis. Now transversus abdominis, it arises from the inner aspect of the lower 6 costal cartilages, or the portion of the ribs which don't have the costal cartilage, like the 11th and 12th. Now from the 12th rib below, it is arising from this thoracolumbar fascia, posterior layer of the thoracolumbar fascia. Then in continuity from this inner lip of the anterior 2/3 of the iliac crest up to the anterior superior iliac spine, and then in continuity from this lateral 1/3 of the inguinal ligament. From these fleshy fiber arises and they form this anterior aponeurosis, which widens downwards. Upward near the xiphoid process, the aponeurosis is much less wider, it is narrower, and below it is becoming wide. So the insertion is the fibers from this lower part, from this inguinal ligament. These fiber, they join the corresponding anterior aponeurotic fiber from the internal oblique to form the conjoint tendon, and they are attached to the pubic crest and the adjoining portion of the medial part of the pectineal line, and remaining fiber, they are attached or they decussate at the linea alba through the posterior layer of the rectus sheath, and this posterior layer of the rectus sheath, they continues posteriorly. Then after this arcuate line, as we discussed, these fibers, they move anteriorly, and here this arcuate line is formed. So they move anterior to the rectus abdominis to be attached to this rectus sheath, and through this to the linea alba, decussate at the linea alba. So conjoint tendon, it is formed by the lowermost fiber of this internal oblique and the aponeurosis of the transversus abdominis, which are arising from the inguinal ligament, and these fiber, they are attached to the pubic crest and the adjoining portion of the pecten pubis, pectineal line, and also to this linea alba in the midline. Now these fiber, they lie just behind this superficial inguinal ring, lying just behind this superficial inguinal ring, and they strengthen this medial part of the posterior wall of the inguinal canal. So this deficiency is here strengthened, and it is also known as falx inguinalis or inguinal falx. Here also it is shown how it is being formed and being attached to this portion of the pubic crest, pecten pubis, and linea alba. Now rectus abdominis, this is a long strap-like muscle occupying just lateral to the midline, and these paired recti, they are separated in the midline by this linea alba. Now these, they run along the entire length of this anterior abdominal wall, lying in this paramedian position. Now these muscle, they arise by its two head of origin, a medial head, which is the narrower one, and a lateral head, which is a larger one. And this medial head, it arises from the pubic symphysis, and even the fiber arises from this adjacent portion of the linea alba, and the fiber, they are interlacing with the each other. And the lateral fiber, they arise from this upper border of the pubic crest, and in the lower portion, these fiber, they are lying edge to edge with each other, and as they proceed upwards towards insertion, they diverge. And this lateral edge formed by these, this is known as the linea semilunaris, running between this tip of the ninth costal cartilage to the pubic tubercle. Now from its origin, these fiber, they run upwards, and they are attached to the 5th to 7th cartilages, and to this lateral border margin of this xiphoid process. And these fibers, they have this tendinous intersection, where the fibers, they are tendinous in a zigzag pattern, and they though don't cover uh, to the entire width or girth of this muscle, but they are attached to this anterior part of the rectus sheath, which is covering this rectus abdominis. So they are attached to the anterior part of the rectus sheath, and when they contract, these portion, this fleshy fiber, they bulge, and they form this uh, bulging pattern, which is known as the six pack in case of this athlete. So this is how the tendons intersection, they are visible in case of athlete, as these tendons intersection, they are interaction as they are attached to the anterior layer of the rectus sheath, and in between are the contracting fleshy fibers forming this bulge. And this midline, this is formed by this linea alba, and lateral, this line, this is formed by the linea semilunaris, the lateral border of this muscle running between the ninth rib, the tip of the ninth rib, to the pubic tubercle. So characteristically, they are generally three intersection, one at the level of umbilicus, one at the level of the xiphoid process, and one in between. So that's from the six packs in case of athlete. This is the anatomical basis of this six pack. Now pyramidalis, it is a small triangular muscle lying within the rectus sheath, and it originates from this upper border of the pubis between the pubic symphysis and pubic tubercle. And from this inferior origin, it moves medially, and the fibers, that tapers to be attached to the linea alba. So this is a triangular muscle lying within the rectus sheath, and it is usually found midway between the umbilicus and pubic symphysis, and as it is attached to the linea alba, it tenses the linea alba. So this is an overview of the muscular layer, anterolateral group, starting with the external oblique. All fibers, they are originating as fleshy fibers and they form a anterior aponeurosis, which through the rectus sheath finally they are decussating at the midline linea alba. So when this external oblique is removed, then the next muscle is seen, fibers running just perpendicular to the external oblique, and this is internal oblique. Again here the fibers, they are decussating at the linea alba through this anterior aponeurosis, which split around the rectus abdominis to form the anterior and posterior layer of the rectus sheath. Now after the removal of the internal oblique, this is the deepest layer which is seen here. This is the transversus abdominis. Again fleshy fibers seen laterally and these anterior aponeurosis are seen medially. So through the this posterior layer of the rectus sheath, it is now attached or decussate at the linea alba. And as we have discussed, these fibers below the arcuate line, they all move forward, only form the anterior layer of the rectus sheath. So here this is the arcuate line and this is the muscle which is lying in the midline, near the midline, separated by this midline portion which is the linea alba. So this is the rectus abdominis occupying the pyramidian position. Now let's understand the rectus sheath. Now this rectus abdominis, it is enclosed by this bilayered fibrous connective tissue running anterior and posterior to this, and this is known as the rectus sheath. Now anteriorly, this rectus sheath, it completely covers this rectus abdominis, and on both extremes, superior and inferior, it is fused with the periosteum of the bone. Now posteriorly, this rectus sheath, this is the posterior view shown from the anterior of the abdominal wall. So this shows the posterior layer of the rectus sheath. Now it is complete in the upper 2/3 portion. Upper 2/3, this portion is complete, but in the lower 1/3, this abruptly stops, ends, and all the layers which forms the rectus sheath posteriorly, they pass anterior to this. So this has this free margin which is arc shaped, and this free margin is known as the arcuate line. So below this level, this rectus abdominis is covered only by this fascia transversalis and extraperitoneal connective tissue. Let's discuss this composition of the rectus sheath. Now the rectus sheath is formed by this anterior aponeurotic portion of this anterolateral abdominal muscles. Now at the level of mid-clavicular line, this internal oblique, it is split around this rectus abdominis and encloses as its anterior and posterior layer. Now anterior layer is joined by this external oblique aponeurosis and posterior layer is joined by the aponeurosis of the transversus abdominis. So anterior layer is formed by the anterior lamina of internal oblique and by the aponeurosis of the external oblique, and posterior lamina is formed by the posterior layer of this internal oblique and aponeurosis of the transversus abdominis, and these finally merge at the level of the linea alba. Now below the arcuate line, all these aponeuroses, they move anteriorly to form the anterior layer of the rectus sheath, and Posteriorly, this rectus abdominis, it is only enclosed by the fascia transversalis. So classically, now this rectus sheath is often described in books as having three composition. Above the costal margins is the internal oblique, it is only below the costal margin. So above the costal margin only external oblique and its aponeurosis exist, and they are covering this rectus abdominis anterior. So above the costal margin, this is only the external oblique aponeurosis and anterior lamina is here. Now between the arcuate line and the costal margin, this is the classical composition. Internal oblique is split and joined by the external oblique aponeurosis to form the anterior layer of the rectus sheath, and posterior lamina is joined by the aponeurosis of transversus abdominis to form the posterior layer of the rectus sheath. Finally, they are merging at the linea alba. Now below the arcuate line, all three aponeuroses, they pass in front of the rectus abdominis, and posteriorly this portion is only covered by the fascia transversalis. Now this new concept of the rectus sheath, it explains the strength of the linea alba and associated rectus sheath, as well as is resilient. Now anterolateral muscles, they transform into anterior aponeurosis, which covers this rectus abdominis or rectus sheath. Now each of these aponeuroses, according to the new concept, they are form of bilaminar aponeurosis, each having an anterior and posterior lamina. Anterior lamina of each, they are running obliquely upward, and the posterior lamina, it is 90° to that, they are running obliquely downward. So each of the layer, the anterior layer, it consists of these three layers, in which the middle layer is having the direction opposite to the anterior and the posterior. So that's provide a inherent stability and strength to this layer. Second is the concept of the dual decussation. So these layers, they finally merge according to the old concept at the linea alba, but according to new concept they cross, and the crossing is dual. They cross not only from the left to right side, but also this anterior lamina, they become posterior lamina, and the posterior lamina, when they cross to the opposite side, they become the anterior lamina. So that is the concept of the dual decussation. The crossing is from left to right or right to left, as well as from anterior to posterior. So that's why this linea alba is the line of decussation rather than merger or. So linea alba, it is the tendinous raphe running from the xiphoid process upward to the pubic symphysis and pubic crest downward, and it is a fibrous line of decussation where the fiber, they move from right to left or left to right, as well as from anterior to posterior. So they form a raphe, midline raphe. And as this middle portion is made of aponeurosis, and laterally, bilateral portion are made of fleshy fibers. So this is similar to the digastric, having an intermediate tendon in form of this anterior aponeurosis, and bilaterally are the fleshy fibers. So this is the concept of digastric in case of centrolateral abdominal muscles. So content of the rectus sheath, it includes the muscles which are rectus abdominis and pyramidalis, these two muscles. Then the neurovascularity, it includes this ends of the lower 6 thoracic nerve and their accompanying posterior intercostal vessels. Now the posterior intercostal nerve, from the intercostal spaces, they enter into this abdominal interface by passing in between the this transversus abdominis and internal oblique, and then it continues up to the midclavicular line where it gives a lateral cutaneous branch, and then it pierces this posterior layer of the internal oblique aponeurosis to enter the rectus sheath, and it continues into the rectus sheath posteriorly up to the midline, and here it pierces the posterior portion of the rectus abdominis, supply it, and then continues forward, and then it ends by supplying this midline portion of the skin as the anterior cutaneous branch. Now the superior inferior epigastric artery. This is the inferior epigastric. This is the superior epigastric vessels. Now the superior epigastric vessels, they are branches from the terminal branches from the internal thoracic, and they pass by passing through this gap between the intercostal fibers and sternal fiber of the diaphragm, and continues up to the umbilicus where they anastomose with the branches from these inferior epigastric. Now inferior epigastric, it is a branch of external iliac, and it emerges at the level of inguinal ligament, then passes behind the conjoint tendon to seep under this arcuate line where it enters the rectus sheath, and it supplies the content of the rectus sheath. And here at the level of the umbilicus, it anastomoses with the fellow from the superior portion, which is the superior epigastric. So here there is an anastomosis between the arteries as well of the vein. So the muscles, the skin from this region, they are supplied by the lower sixth thoracic nerve and upper first lumbar nerve. Now lower sixth thoracic nerve, they passes from this intercostal space to the abdominal interface by running between the this neurovascular space between the internal oblique and transversus abdominis, and before that it gives this lateral cutaneous branch which also supplies the external oblique muscle, and as it passes between this interface of internal oblique and transversus abdominis, it supplies both the muscles, and as it passes and pierces through the rectus abdominis, it supplies it. So all of these muscles, they are supplied by this lower sixth thoracic nerve. Additionally, this internal oblique and transversus abdominis, they are also supplied by the branches from L1, which are iliohypogastric and ilioinguinal nerve. So apart from superior epigastric artery, which is the branch of terminal branch of internal thoracic artery, and inferior epigastric artery, which is a branch from the external iliac artery. Other than these, this portion is supplied by the upper three lumbar arteries, which by passing behind the quadratus lumborum, they enter the neurovascular space between the internal oblique and transversus abdominis, and the deep circumflex iliac artery, which is again the branch of external iliac artery, and at the inguinal ligament, then passes running along the internal lip of the iliac crest, then it at the level of anterior superior iliac spine, it moves through the fibers of the transversus abdominis to lie between this neurovascular space between the internal oblique and transversus abdominis, and here it anastomoses. So that's how this portion is getting this vascularity. Now the superficial tissue of the anterolateral abdominal wall, they drain in quadrants. Above the umbilicus, they drain into this pectoral group of axillary lymph nodes, and below the umbilicus, they drain into the superficial inguinal lymph node. Let's discuss the function of these abdominal muscles. First, they act as the flexor of the vertebral column as they are attached to the thoracic case above and to the bony pelvis below. So when these muscles contract, they approximate these two, and because of that, whichever portion is fixed, the other portion approximated to the other portion. So it causes the flexion of the vertebral column, especially in the region of lower thoracic and lumbar portion. And among all, this rectus abdominis is the most powerful flexor. And as the oblique muscle, they are obliquely attached, so they act as a rotator as well as lateral flexor of the trunk. The second is depress the rib as in case of the powerful expiration. So these muscles, the recti and the oblique, they approximate the rib to the pelvic girdle, and if the trunk is kept upright by this erector spinae and this flexion is prevented, then these act as a powerful expiratory force, and it is aided by the abdominal compression through the transversus abdominis, which elevate the diaphragm, and that increases the expiratory effort further, and that is utilized in case of blowing the trumpet, opera singing, or powerful coughing. The third is they act to compress the abdomen as in case of evacuation like micturition and defecation, and in case of heavy lifting. So as the flexion of the vertebral column is prevented by the erector spinae, these oblique muscle, they compress the abdominal cavity and it is aided by the transversus abdominis. And when one hold the breath and fix the diaphragm, this causes a evacuation effect on this lower portion, and that aid in the micturition and defecation and also during parturition. And second is by lifting a heavy weight, that is seen in case of weightlifter. So they take a deep breath and hold it. So they fix the diaphragm by closing the glottis, and this strong column of the air aid in the lifting the weight. So thus this abdominal muscle is utilized in lifting a heavy weight. And fourth is to support the viscera. So if the abdominal wall is incised, these intestine they spill out, and also when one gets a blow, these muscle contract, and this contraction prevents the damage to the abdominal cavity and the underlying vessel. Let's understand the anatomical consideration related to the abdominal incision. So abdomen or the abdominal cavity, it can be explored by three type of incisions. One which is a vertical one which is a transverse one, and one which is a obliquely placed one. So we will discuss them one by one. Vertical incisions. The vertical incision, the example of these are midline incision. Now the midline incision is the incision which can be performed anywhere from this Zaphod process to the pubic symphysis, and generally it is done in case of emergencies, and it is exploratory type, and it can be limited above or below the umbilicus and can extend round the umbilicus. So it cuts through the skin, the subcutaneous connective tissue, linea alba, then fascia transversalis and extraperitoneal fat, and finally the peritoneum. Then advantage of this type of incision is provide a good exposure, since it is cutting through this avascular field, so there is a minimum blood loss or nerve injury or even the muscle injury, and it can be performed quickly during the emergency cases. Disadvantages: first, the care must be taken not to disturb the falciform ligament just above the umbilicus, especially on the right side. Second, because of traction, it is generally a midline scar is there, so it is not cosmetically pleasing. And in the lower portion, especially where these two recti they are lying side to side and there is less gap between them, if the suture technique is not correct, that may lead to incisional hernia. Second is the paramedian incision. Paramedian incision is generally done usually 3 to 5 centimeter to the side of the midline to generally access the laterally placed organs. Advantages are: the closure is often more secure than that of the median incision and it provides the access to the lateral organs. Disadvantages: again, longer to perform or closed, so that causes the increased risk of infection, and there is more intraoperative bleeding as well as the nerve damage, and it because of this it often compromises its innervation or the vascularity to the medial structure, and they passes from this lateral to the towards the midline, and also it has poor cosmetic result and higher risk of infection. Now generally in case of these incision, we cut through the skin, then anterior rectus sheath is cut, rectus abdominis is retracted laterally, then posterior rectus sheath is cut, and then fascia transversalis, or then in the lower portion transversalis, fascia transversalis is cut, then extraperitoneal cut and peritoneum is cut. Now when this lateral margin of the rectus abdominis is cut, though rarely it is performed, this is known as pararectal incision or Battle incision. Now next is the transverse incisions. So transverse incision includes this cabal incision or transverse incision as we say, and it is done for the liver transplant, also known as superior bucket handle incision, generally in the region of the epigastrium, and it is, as we have already discussed, it is done in case of the liver transplant. It provides a good exposure. Pro: they causes less pain and can have a good access to the upper GI structure, and also it causes less damage to the muscle and the nerve because they run parallel to the split and that can be rejoined. Limitation: limited lateral access and higher risk of infection and hematoma because of this damage to the vascularity. Second is the Lange incision, and it is similar to that of the gridiron McBurney incision. We will discuss that along with this gridiron incision. Only this is a transversely placed incision. And third is Fanon steel incision, often known as C-section. So it is traditionally known as caesarean section or C-section, generally done by the obstetrician on the gravid uterus, and it allows good access to the lower GI portion and the pelvic organ. So it is a convex incision at the suprapubic skin crease around 5 cm above the pubic symphysis. So the pro are, it generally is a good aesthetic result and minimizes the nerve damage. Limitation: the exposure of the abdominal structure is limited and ability to extend the incision is also limited. It is only limited up to the pelvic organ, and also there is a risk to the damage to the underlying bladder. And third type is the oblique incision. First is this coccus incision, which is done for cholecystectomy and for the biliary tract, and it is done 3 cm below and parallel to the costal margin from the midline to the rectus body plateau, and it is less painful, provide a good exposure, and also less post-operative complications. Thus, it also heals well. Only limitation: it takes longer to open and close due to the layers, and also because of that there is increased chances of infection. And there are two type of modification related to it. When this incision is extended similarly towards the opposite side, that means to the this left side, so this is known as rooftop incision, and this provides a good view to the spleen. And second is when it is extended vertically above, this is known as the Mercedes-Benz incision. Next is this McBurney gridiron incision, which is done at the McBurney point, lying in a line joining this umbilicus to the anterior superior clear spine, and in the lateral third of this the McBurney incision is done. And this McBurney incision is generally done for appendicitis. And here these muscles, they are splitted rather than cut, and they are splitted along their fibers. So external oblique is splitted along this incision line, as the incision line is along this direction of the fiber of the external oblique. It is directed downward and medially, and the fibers of the internal oblique and transverse abdominis, they are splitted opposite to that. And this incision is, when done transversely, this is known as Lange incision. So similarly, this oblique line is generally replaced by this transverse line. The rest of the portion is similar. And when this arc of the grid ends iron incision, it is expanded laterally and towards the cephalic portion to facilitate the access to the colon. It is known as Rutherford Morrison incision.